Welcome back to our Idea Launch series. Our goal is helping you create better software products. This is episode 5. In our last episode, we took a look at the solution space, generating solutions and prototyping solutions. Today, we're going to talk about what to do with your prototype, how to test it, and then how to get your whole team aligned and ready for the build. My name is Darrin. I'm the founder of TrueFit. My background is software development. Joining me again today is John Beck, our Director of Product Design. Welcome, John. Good to have you back.
Hey, Darrin. It's good to be here. You know, I love to talk about this stuff.
Of course. So, we've been working our way through the discover stage, and we've got a clear product vision with understand and frame. We've now talked about the solutions, and that's super fun because that ends with a prototype that you can use for all kinds of purposes. So now we want to talk about what to do with a prototype. So let's start with validation and user testing. And so why are we doing that?
Yep. This is a challenging phase. So we're really kind of bringing discovery to an end, but this is really the meat of what discovery is all about. What we're trying to do is, with the validate phase, we're trying to test our assumptions, those critical assumptions that we identified when we were prototyping, and primarily collect evidence. This is where we put our scientific research hat on as a team. And, when I talk about this stuff, I do like to emphasize, I often do it when coaching the teams. It's, this isn't, we're not going to give a dissertation or our PhD, but how can we effectively go out and collect evidence that we're on the right track and actually put some of our proposed solutions in front of an end user? So the big things that we're trying to validate typically at this stage are, is this a solution that somebody wants? Is it effectively going to solve the problem for them, remove a burden, advance them towards satisfactorily completing a task, working efficiently, saving money.
And this is really when you start to get feedback on, is the solution we came up with in the last phase going to solve the problem we came up with?
Exactly.
In understand and
it's
frame.
Sobering.
So the answer might be,
it might be yes, and it may be no. And you need that evidence. That's the big thing. Yeah. We've just seen over the years, such value in quickly getting that evidence. There's a confidence that comes for the team who's trying to solve these super complex problems, and there's also confidence that comes from the decision makers, like those who are going to approve the budget, or those, who are managing or responsible for the overall product strategy, or the management of the business, or the growth of the business.
I like how you're saying evidence and confidence, because keeping in mind that what we really want to happen is successful product market fit when we finally launch this. And this is the evidence that we're gathering that this is going to fit in the market, and ultimately allow us to achieve our business outcomes, right?
Yeah, and this is where we have a chance. The team has a chance to kind of rally the team around. This is the vision of what we're going to do, and we're going to do this before we do something else. And here's why. And we actually have some evidence behind it to ground our decisions in. And we are getting all the stakeholders aligned around that, but we use the insights that come out of validation to really move that forward.
Yeah. So who are we testing? Who are we testing the prototype with?
Good question. When in the prior podcast, we talked a little bit about the types of prototypes that we make and what we're trying to learn. Usually, we are trying to apply kind of lean research methods, lean product development methods here. There is a question by this point, we have at least a root understanding of who our user segments are. So we're trying to get exposure to it's usually maybe 5 or 6, a small segment of potential users per segment. So, we've been using an example of a physical therapy platform.
So you have a therapist, that's one user segment. You have the patient.
Yeah. Can we get in front of a couple therapists, doctors, patients, admins? And, there's a question early on that the team has to resolve of, when we have our segments and the number of users that we need to talk to. Some of the methods can vary between qualitative methods. So a qualitative method is, typically more interview based and gives the moderator a chance to, let's show a prototype. Let's ask the user to do something with that prototype. How would you get from A to Z? Where would you look to do something? What is this dashboard saying to you? And it gives the moderator a chance to probe and kind of dig a little deeper about usability, preference questions. If we feel that we need a broader sample and we're looking for more questions around how much somebody wants something or how much do they either desire a product or would be willing to use it, then we do have sometimes some quantitative methods that can be used. Sometimes survey-based methods can be an effective way to get to larger samples over 20, 30 and higher. Maybe you want to test market response in different areas, like urban versus rural or coastal versus center of the country, kind of things that maybe that's what you're the evidence that you're trying to collect. And so that can sometimes get you to a bigger sample.
Is this also the time when we would test certain pieces of the business model, like pricing and, people's willingness to pay?
That is, and that's often one of the things that we're trying to validate. And that may drive some questions about whether it's qualitative or quantitative or both. Sometimes, we certainly run into both in certain projects. But yeah, there's a balance that we're always trying to strike between how efficiently can we collect that evidence and move on to the next step, which is preparing the team for the build.
Yeah. So think back, what are some kind of classic examples of things we learned testing a prototype and maybe something that was surprising that we learned that we didn't expect to learn?
We have worked on so many different products, but this is really where your biases and your presumptions or assumptions about how something's going to work can be a cold splash of water sometimes. To sometimes, like an example of like a survey based method. I mentioned in the prior podcast that sometimes we use storyboards to test. And we're really trying to gauge value to a prospective user and the likelihood of that the likelihood of that feature to satisfy. And you can learn two things. Certain features are going to test really highly and are highly in demand, and users are giving you green lights, big thumbs up. Like, if you build that, I will use it and I will pay for it. Super valuable and the kind of thing that you typically want to hear. But equally valuable is, I don't want that. I don't see any value in that. Or, what can we drop out of the list?
Right.
Because the features that we can either make secondary or move further back in a release plan can have significant impact for the team. So knowing what to include and what to exclude is equally valuable. And we've gotten that. Sometimes a quantitative survey, there's certain methods that you can use that really reveal those kinds of feature priority preferences. you can also sometimes use those to reveal differences in segments. We worked on a product that actually was a therapy product not too long ago, that we wanted to understand differences along generational lines. And even just the whole idea of using a technology to connect you to your care team that was going to monitor you in your home. People had very different attitudes about that, just based on generational lines. And so a survey will start to reveal that, and you can do comparative. Because you're using some quantitative methods, you can score, you can compare between brackets. You could start to see differences, along gender lines or income lines or education lines, or you could slice up your data. On the qualitative side, an example I'd like to we just learned so much in these discussions. It's like we have a proposed solution and we sit down. We worked on a legal tool that was software that would help a patent lawyer prepare a case by researching patents. And there was some very smart technology on the search and kind of natural language processing side of it. But where we got great feedback was how does an attorney stitch that work into their day-to-day workflow? And we just learned so much in being able to take our prototypes, sit with the attorneys in different practices, different size law firms, and find out that, where they wanted to control the results of their searches. Like, I don't want to show my client everything. I want to show them the things that are most relevant. So I need an ability to collect all the results for myself and then segment part of that for what I want to share with the client. And those kinds of insights have huge impact on whether or not we need to prioritize something in the first release of the software.
And the reason this is so important, I'll just point this out, point out the obvious, that we're doing this with a prototype. And as small a prototype, could be a storyboard, could be a click-through. We're doing this with as small a prototype as possible. These are things you want to learn before you start the more expensive process of building anything.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And so this is a time when it's least expensive to make changes to the design and changes to the feature set and changes to the software. So we're trying to get all these insights and make all these, like, finalize the feature list and prioritize the feature list before you've spent the time and money to build anything.
Yes.
So,
yeah. And it gives you sometimes these situations, the software is complex, but the environments in which they get used are potentially very complex and very diverse. So, we've done some, cases with like enterprise software where, we can demonstrate up front what the core functionality of the software is, and use those interviews to help us understand, like, you're going to have to know how to sell this software into this type of environment versus another type of environment. That there's value to be had in both. But the insights that we're getting back not only help us shape the product, but help us shape the go-to-market strategy about understanding, like, there might be certain features that are just required in this other environment or another kind of adjacent market. So we might make a strategic decision to say, we're going to focus on one market first, release that software, get to product market fit, and then we'll shift to the other market. We'll introduce these other features.
That's really good.
At a time. So that kind of insight early has huge implications for product release strategy and overall go-to-market strategy.
Yeah. So speaking of release strategy, we've gathered all this evidence, and now we're going to go into story mapping and release planning, which is kind of like landing the plane, right? This is the culmination of discovery. You're going to take all these insights and turn that into a real product roadmap. And so talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So
again, what is story mapping?
Yeah. The best way to approach this again is as a team. It's a team sport. We identified opportunities as a team. We moved into solutions. We identified critical assumptions. We've now learned that either we're hitting the mark or we're not. We don't necessarily solve where we're not. We don't address that just yet. We can put a pin in things and say, like, this is fully ready to move forward and should be prioritized for the release.
Right.
This is something else that might be on the bubble. It may not get into that first release. So before we go and fix or, fine tune our solutions, we want to bring the team together. We want to focus on now a kind of more nuanced vision of what the product features actually break down to be. What's the work ahead? So we use and recommend a common process in the agile world is story mapping. And really what we're trying to identify is, what features align to the critical problems that we're trying to address for the end user. I keep using this example of like a therapy platform, but early on we know we have to create value for the doctor, for the surgeon, for the therapist. We know we have to create some value for the patient, but what is the minimal set of functionality that actually solves the problem for each of those people? And maybe there's an admin in the mix. And so how much of this do we have to address up front? So story mapping is a great visual framework for, when you're in office and collaborating, we often dedicate like a giant chunk of a wall and just start putting stickies up. Like, if this is the problem that we're trying to solve for the user, here's all the features that are associated with that and the kinds of details that would determine whether something is a small, medium, or large solution. That gives the team the ability to have a discussion of, this is priority number one. This is a really differentiating feature. There's lots of arguments that come into like, what is in the first release, but is it differentiating? Do we have any evidence that users want this? Well, we do, because we proved it in the validation step. This is something that they want. This is something they'll pay for. This sets the stage for subsequent features that we could add later, so this is bedrock.
But this is also where seeing things sometimes get challenging.
Right.
Because, we work with a lot of business leaders. They have big visions and they, see everything that's possible with this product very far down the road. We work with a lot of visionary people. We love big visions. But you said minimal, right? So what's the minimal set of features that needs to be in this first release? So we love big visions, but we really help people start small as is practical to test product market fit. But the one big thing that you always have to wrestle with at this stage is, how much money do you have available? What's the budget for this stuff? And how long is it going to
take to build?
Timeline.
All of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot of things coming together here. What are some of the challenges that you see with getting everything aligned? Yeah,
I mean, the hard thing in this is minimal's relative. So it depends on the nature of the product. It might depend, minimal, if you're, a single entrepreneur, there is no preceding product. You have this early vision and you have potentially a new market to explore. You might be able to start with a really small little kernel of features. But if you're a bigger enterprise app and you're facing like a complete retooling of your existing app, it can be very difficult to remove features. So minimal is driven by like all the stuff that is built, and maybe minimal improving the features that are there in a rewrite, but adding a few features. And we know why, and we've kind of minimized that set of new features that are getting added. So that part is hard. Understanding kind of trade-offs. There's a magic that happens between, so visualizing it is key. Getting it into columns and rows, like this has to be in the first release. Being able to align that to some sense of budget and time to build, and then pulling your stakeholders into that discussion. What we have found, it can be a challenge, but everybody values the visibility. And there's a magic that can happen to say, like, we have to make some concessions somewhere. We have to pull some things out of the first release. It doesn't mean that they won't get built at all. It just means that they're prioritized for a later release, and something else has to come in. And I feel confident about making that decision because I have some actual evidence to show and ground that decision. And to those on the product team, we feel confident making those recommendations, but can we bring the stakeholders around to align around that? Having alignment among the stakeholders at that point in the game is absolutely critical. That's the essence of your product strategy, is this is what the product's going to do and what it isn't going to do. And this is why, and we know why. These are the ultimate goals that we're trying to hit out of the gate. And this is what we're going to measure the success of the software against.
And that's why we call it the alignment space.
Yes.
Because you're getting everybody aligned. That's great. So what are some key takeaways? So
applying lean research methods to validate quickly, trusting sometimes you have to make some trade-offs around smaller quantities to get to the insights to inform decisions. But it's really about collecting evidence. Collect your evidence around those critical things. You do have to be willing to look at the evidence and let the evidence speak for itself. Don't ignore what it's telling you, because at the same point, if it's telling you that sometimes you get evidence that'll say, like, this is okay, but it could be better. And you've now got some insight from a potential user who's sort of helping you paint a picture of what great would look like. It's okay now, but this could be great if it did, X, Y, or Z. You can now start to account for that in your release plan and know how to get there. So it's not that everything's resolved up front, but you have a good sense of scope and like what you're going to prioritize in that release. Another good principle is, visualize the work ahead in the story map, and use that to align your stakeholders.
Nice.
Get aligned.
So we've made it to the end of discovery. We've got a strong product roadmap and release plan. We're ready to start the build.
Right.
So this is also a very exciting
time. We're off and running.
Taken a lot of risk out of this product, and really giving ourselves confidence that this is going to achieve product market fit and hit our business goals. So thanks. It's a great conversation.
The learning doesn't stop. That part is key. Like, we are agile, you're agile. If you're building software, you've got to be able to continue to learn. But the big risks around alignment, around user value, around technical feasibility, those really big ones are dramatically reduced, giving you the best chance for success.
That's great. Thanks, John. This has really been a good conversation.
It's always a fun time.
And thank you for joining us. If you found this episode helpful, please subscribe and share it with a friend who might be solving an interesting problem with software. If you have an interesting software idea, we'd love to learn about it. And who knows, maybe we will include that in a future episode. Please join us for our next episode, where we will be moving from discover into the build and start to talk about how products actually get built. We hope to see you there.